Hi, I'm LeanPub from LeanPub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Chris Pinnock. Based in London or near London, Chris is an IT professional with a 25-year career in IT, telecommunications, and blockchain. He currently works at the Tezos Foundation, a Swiss foundation supporting the developer of the Tezos blockchain. He runs the foundation's mining infrastructure and the IT department. You can follow him on Twitter at Chris Pinnock and check out his website at chrispinnock.com. Chris is the author of the LeanPub book, Learning Russian Verbs. In the book, Chris helps you learn Russian by presenting verbs grouped by subject with very helpful conjugation tables. In this interview, we're going to talk about Chris's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his unique approach to writing and publishing this book. So thank you very much, Chris, for being on the LeanPub Front Matter podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and your path into a career in cloud computing and technology.
Yeah, I think it's a little complicated. I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. I grew up, so I live in Essex, and I grew up near here. And I was good at computing. I was relatively good at mathematics, and did my A-levels in computing and mathematics. And for whatever reason, I decided mathematics was what I wanted to do. And I went to university, and 4 years in, I decided I wanted to do mathematics. That was it. I wanted to lecture mathematics, and did a PhD. And at the end of the PhD, you've got to think about what you do next. And the obvious thing to do is try and get a postdoc. Now, I did apply for 1 or 2 postdocs, but they're quite difficult to get. I ended up in a job doing Unix system administration in the college where I'd studied. And that was a limited contract. So I think about 9 months in, I thought, well, I've got to start looking for something else. And an opportunity came along to go and do that in a telecommunications company. So I joined the IP networking team, and this is like 24 years ago. Some of these technologies were, that you think of now, that they were new, bleeding edge, and we were selling them we're selling what you buy now, for thousands of pounds a month, right? And I worked my way up there to VP level. It took me a few years, and I ended up running the entire systems team. So 2011, I was vice president of systems, running all of the IT for this pan-European company that had a big network. All good stuff. And I suppose around about 2015, I started to get a little bored of that, looking at the same things every day. So I went out and did some consultancy for a few years, ended up contracting, and I got a call for this job at the Tezos Foundation, and it was only supposed to be 2 days a week, running some IT on AWS. And then the job description came through, and it was like 4 pages and various other things. I thought, right, I'm going to take that, and that's where I've been for 3.5 years. So, I learned lots of new things doing that. Now, what I haven't told you is, rewind back to 2013. I was in Prague working at the telecoms company. I had done some movement of staff to the Czech Republic and Bulgaria. I was spending about 3 weeks every month in Prague, and that's where I met my wife. See, and she is Russian. So purely by accident, I meet my wife. We got married in 2015, so we've been together about 9 years. And I decided it was a good idea to learn Russian, purely for practical reasons. Her family don't speak English. So there we are.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story. So I've got a couple of fun questions to ask about that. The first one is, this has actually come up on the podcast before, but I used to live in London, and I did a doctorate in the UK, but I was outside London. And I always wondered what it would be like actually trying to be a student in London, because there was so much distraction and so much fun, and just so many interesting things to do all the time. Did you find, being in a great city like that a distraction while you were studying?
Yes and no. I was quite a good student, so I used to spend my summers reading notes and writing my own notes, almost to exhaustion sometimes. On a Wednesday, the combinatoric study group would meet. We'd meet at 2:00, and at 3:00 we'd finish. And then we would go down to the Old Globe, which doesn't exist anymore in Milan, but we'd go down to the Old Globe, and we would we'd have a few drinks and talk about combinatorics and groups and all these good mathematical things. And I remember several occasions where we may well have finished the stock.
All right.
Let's move to another part. So you're right, there are distractions, but some of these distractions are part and parcel of the academic life, which is, the socialization, the intellectual discussion over a few beers or wines or whatever. So no, not really. I mean, I finished in the 3 years. I actually finished. I handed in and finished the exam, and it was like the 3-year mark. So
Another version of a question that comes relatively frequently on the podcast is, so you studied mathematics, you got a PhD, and you went into, computing and technology and things like that. Do you wish you'd studied computer science?
well, when I was at A levels, I was going to study computer science,
Right.
and I had a really good mathematics teacher. He published papers. He hadn't handed in his PhD. He'd stopped for some reason. He later did. He later rectified it, but he was able to explain mathematics very well. And it's something I've taken away from him. If you can get into the subject and explain it and put it into concepts that people will relate to. I still tell this story. I walked out one of his lessons and he just taught us how to do differentiation. And he taught us limits and everything. And I walked over to my grandparents' house, sat down and explained it to my granddad the same afternoon. And he was surprised that I could explain it. So I had this very good teacher. And that was probably instrumental in why I chose mathematics. But I always had computing at the back as well. And we did a bit of computing, as part of the mathematics degree.
And just before we go on to talk about the book, because actually being able to, I know you brought that up on purpose, being able to explain things systematically and explain things well, and your book obviously, which puts that into practice very well. But before we do that, can you talk a little bit about Tezos and what it is, how it works, what baking is, and what you do for them?
Yeah, so Tezos is a blockchain created by Arthur and Kathleen Brightman. It was launched in around 2018, around about that time. And if you go back, the original chain was Bitcoin, right? So you've got the ability to transfer value and not have a bank control it. Ethereum came along, and the idea there was to have a sort of distributed computer that could run these smart contracts. So Tezos has all those things. So the NFTs you see, the artworks, they're really smart contracts. We have all those things, but Arthur wanted to make sure we could change the chain rapidly and have some kind of involvement. So the people that make the blocks, they're called bakers on Tezos. They're called validators on other proof of stake chains, but the bakers get to vote. So you have to put a stake down to bake, and that's Tezcoin. If you've got more Tezcoin than someone else, you'll get more a vote, and you'll get more baking opportunities. And that governance, we vote on proposals, and the chain changes the economic protocol, how that behaves on the basis of these votes. But that's the differentiator, and it's also been highly stable. We haven't had an outage since the inception. Now, what I do is I work for the Tezos Foundation. We administer the fund from the fundraiser. So back in the day, people put in Bitcoin, money, whatever, into a fundraiser, and they received some Tez in return. And we manage that fund, and we spend it on grants and investments to keep the chain going. So we'll pay money to, say, a wallet provider, so that there's a Tezos wallet. We'll pay money to an NFT provider, so they've got a site. And the idea is that in 5-10 years, when our money is no more, these things will be able to maintain themselves and carry on.
And just for people listening who might be sort of mystified, what's the difference between a proof of work and a proof of stake blockchain?
Well, now you're talking. Oh, you got me. Age 15 in the evening. So if you think that, the thing about Bitcoin is that you've got to have a lot of compute power. And the reason for that is you've got to prove your work. So what you're doing there is people say it's a complicated mathematical puzzle. It's not. What you're doing is you're taking a block and you're hashing it. And you're able to change a few values in that block. There's an area in the block where you can change that. And so the hash will be different. And so you're continually changing these values, hashing the block with all the transactions in it. And you're trying to get the number under a certain number. And as time has gone by on the Bitcoin network, that number has got lower, which has made getting a block harder. So if you and I put a computer on the network today, we're unlikely to mine a block. We'd be very lucky. We'd have to put a lot of compute on it. So it takes a lot of power, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's a certain luck element. Whereas with a proof of stake chain, what you do is you have a stake. So your validator, which is not known for a miner, has a wallet connected to it. It has a security bond, which is in the native coin. And on the basis of how much stake you get a number of slots. And in those slots, you're expected to produce the block. Now, the only naughty thing you can do, well, one of the naughty things you can do on a proof of stake chain is produce 2 blocks at the same slot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is called double baking. And if you do that, the network notices and you lose your bond.
Okay.
So that's why you stake, because that, if you think about it, you've got 2 blocks, it splits the chain, right? So that's a substantial difference. And on Tezos, you can bake with a Raspberry Pi. You can do it. So you don't have to have the compute, which means it's environmentally friendly. There's no fighting over who produces the block. And that's the key difference.
Right. And so you said, I actually didn't know this, that it's like Ethereum. So this explains something I saw, but I think, so you can actually write programs or applications in the network or the platform.
Yes. So we have a Turing complete language called Mishrason.
Right.
And we have 3 high-level compilers that will go down to that. And so if you think the sort of thing you can do with that is you can have an NFT. There's a piece of artwork stored somewhere and with an ownership. So you can see who owns that. It will have an owner. And you can set rules in it so that if you sell that NFT or transfer it, the original owner gets 10% of the costs. And that's written into these smart contracts. Similarly, you and I could set up a contract on Tezos or Ethereum that says if we call it, it pays out 50% of the fund that way and 50% on that way. Yeah, so that you can write these things on the chain.
Okay, great. And just before we go on to talking about learning Russian, you said money's going to be gone in 5 to 10 years, and I can't let you go without asking you about that. Do you really believe that?
No, well, so the foundation has got a fund.
Right.
And we're investing that fund. We would like to have a long runway. We are planning for a long runway. Mm-hmm. But there is always the possibility that something could happen where for whatever reason that value drops. So, we are planning for a long runway. But, 20, 30 years down the line, are we going to be around? Who knows? Do we want the Tezos chain to be around? Yes, we do. Of course we do. So it needs such a Bitcoin looks after itself.
I see.
It owns itself.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's such a fascinating time to be living in so many different ways. And this sort of we sort of back in the day when we were bootstrapped, we did some looking into cryptocurrency and stuff like that as well. And so I know a little bit about it, and it's just so incredibly fascinating to see the creativity and the different kind of approaches that are out there, and the sort of different applications that people have. And it's just fascinating work. But moving on to learning Russian. So you told us your story about why you're learning Russian. So you met your wife and she's Russian and her family doesn't speak English. I have one little joke about this. Sort of one time I tried to learn Russian was a friend of mine, and I was going to be going to visit some friends in Kiev. And it was kind of like, I'd always loved Russian literature, but I'd always read it in translation in English. And so I was going to Kiev, and it's like, well, I could learn Ukrainian, or I could learn some Russian. I guess I'm just going to sort of learn some Russian instead. And because it might have wider application to my interests. And so I got a Penguin book of how to learn Russian or something like that. And after I'd been in Kiev for a couple of days, my friends sent me out and I was sort of like to go do a chore, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I went to a kiosk on the street, and I went up to the guy and I said, "Muzna, сейчас большой Stella, пожалуйста." And he looks at me, "Hi, can I please have 6 big Stellas?" was what I was trying to say. And he looks at me and he goes, "Is that all?" Which taught me that
Canada was written.
Yeah.
Canada was written.
Canada was written all over me, and I failed. So, what's a better way to learn Russian?
That's interesting. So there's several ways. If you go to a school, where there's a lot of traditional Russian teachers, they will try and teach you a lot of grammar, which I get bedded into. And my wife moved to Prague, and she learned Czech in 3 months, and she's learned some Italian and so on. She's a very practical learner. I think you have to be prepared to make mistakes, and you have to encourage the people you talk to talk back in the language. For sure, you just have to persist. I'm currently learning French, and I ordered some steaks the other day, and she just asked me if I wanted them medium. She didn't even bother, because the neon sign here says, English. You have to persevere and be prepared to make mistakes and not get embarrassed about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. That sort of mood is throughout your book, which is, looking at a line here. Do not be afraid to skip over something that you do not understand. You're on a journey. It's going to take you time. It's going to take practice, and you use the sort of bodybuilding analogy as well. But like, it's muscles. They're not. You're not going to take a pill that's going to make you big, and it's not going to keep you that way. You need to exercise your muscles, and you need to sort of memorize things, and you need to go over them over and over, and then use them in your life as much.
Absolutely. You have to repeat, and then repeat some more. Particularly, I mean, I'm a bit older as well, so if I put it down for 2 weeks, I have to really pick it up again.
And one thing I like about that, being articulate about that approach to things, is that it's not like, don't beat yourself up, especially if you're not like taking a test in school. Just take, you don't need to be all that concerned about every single mistake you make or something like that. People will, and when you're learning a new language, people will obviously, they'll enjoy correcting you as long as you're polite and receptive to it. Be like, no, that's fun. And they might even enjoy, like I said, explaining like, yeah, no, that's a little bit different in that particular case. Particularly, I mean, if you ever have spoken to someone who's learning English, think about your own reaction to them when they make a mistake. It's not, "Oh, you're an idiot." It's like, "Oh yeah, let me explain."
Let me help.
Let me help. Yeah. And you, one point you make about your book is that it does assume that you've learned the alphabet first.
Yes.
Which is it's interesting because the Russian alphabet can look quite daunting at first if you're, say, an English language speaker, but a lot of the characters kind of map onto the sounds of English language letters.
But to a degree.
Yeah. And so it can be like, so for example, words like photograph, for example, you can actually sort of start to recognize that relatively quickly if you're looking at it in Russian.
Yes. Yes. So the modern word for photograph is the same, but there are words that are not. I think I've also got another book I'm working on, LeanPub, which I shelved, partly because I broke my arm. It's quite difficult to do a book on handwriting, breaking your arm. And I need to pick that up next, but that does actually go through all this. So the Cyrillic alphabet was invented by the Bulgarians, and it comes from a mixture of the Greek alphabet and various other. So you can plot the history back, and for example, Russian has a V and a B, and that comes from the Greek, where you have the both versions. Whereas we still have our B is a B, and then we have a different letter for the V. So it is daunting and it is confusing.
It is. Yeah. No, you've got a section in here, letter. And I'm looking at the handwriting book, letters similar to Latin ones, but with different sounds, things like that.
Yes.
I actually sort of got a little bit more proficient just reading Alexei Navalny's tweets back when he was alive. Just sort of tried to sort of puzzle them through a little bit. So it's interesting how one can kind of dive in to Russian, things like that, and just sort of like, oh yeah, B is a V, H is an N, things like that. can be.
And for good reasons. And so once you've got particularly again with the mathematics, if you've done all the Greek letters, as you had to do a mathematics degree, there's a certain amount of that's the pi. The p is a pi.
Yeah. No, you'll recognize it pretty quickly. And one thing you mentioned in the back of the book, so just to go and talk a little bit about how you're making this book, you said you wrote a Go computer program to format the tables that implements the general rules of conjugation. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about how that works. I mean, writing a program to conjugate verbs.
Yeah. So I originally wrote it in Perl, and the problem, Perl, I know how to fix the bugs now, but it's quite difficult to use UTF-8, and so of course you've got all these Cyrillic characters, and you're trying to match them. They're not necessarily one byte wide. And also, you'll notice in the book that in Russian you have stress. And so for learners, you put the stress on with an accent, which is a combined character on the Mac anyway. So you're trying to match all this stuff. And you need a language that can do that. And I happen to be learning Go. And Go was perfect for that. And I think the segue into why I was using LeanPub, one of the things I like about it is because it's all in Markdown, you can generate your files. So a lot of the pages in the book, every verb page in the book is actually a special format I've got of 9 lines that specify just enough to get the verb conjugated, and then the examples and some free text. And I have a make file at the top, type make, and it runs a Go program on each one, and it builds the tables. And that's how I build the book. If I wanted to do that in Word or something else like that, I think it would have taken me a lot longer. Whereas I'm just outputting Markdown tables. So it works quite well.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. It's interesting because LeanPub books are written in. I mean, we have an upload mode for people who want to write their book their own way, and then produce their ebook files their own way. But we have a plain text writing mode where you write in Markdown, or to be more specific, Markuo, which is our version of Markdown for books. And basically, for if you're a non-technical person, computer programs are written in something called plain text, and so are LeanPub books. And so if you want to actually use programs to help you put your book together, that way of doing it is actually really helpful. If you can like automatically generate kind of tables, for example, if you're writing a book in plain text, you have to actually sort of use text to indicate this is a table, this is a cell in a table, things like that. That can get very tedious to type it out, right? Which is why, and if you're using Microsoft Word, an app like that, it'll be like, oh, I'm making a table, and it'll do all the programming for you, and you type in the little cells. In plain text, you have to say this is a cell, this is a table coming now. But if you're good at programming, you can actually sort of automate a lot of that kind of stuff. And then if you're doing something like what Chris is doing, where you're sort of generating tables of conjugated verbs, but it could be like a matrix or something else like that. It's actually like it really speeds things up and makes it a lot faster.
Absolutely. So all those tables are generated, and the only time I've really had to work is where the verb's irregular, and I had to override everything. So that's a good thing. Also, I mean, to say, when I started writing this book, I did it in the LeanPub Markdown, and Markel was quite new. So I've been writing this for a long time. But back then, the tools that were available on most computers for EPUB and Kindle books weren't that great. I mean, now if you've got a Mac, you can output a book with Pages or Word or whatever, but you're still a little bit constrained in you can't have any dynamic content. And Pages doesn't do big bibliographies very well and cross-references. So you've got this control. And the first word processor I used on the BBC back in 1986, funnily enough, to make something italic, you put stars around it, and to make something underlined, you put lines under it. So I'm quite used to Markdown.
Yeah, the point I always make is a sort of for my sins, former English major. Actually, I shouldn't apologize. I'm very proud of that. But the reason typewriters back in the day, when people typed on typewriters with pieces of paper and stuff like that, had underline, was to indicate to someone you were handing it off to, this should be in italics, because you couldn't what you see is what you get on a typewriter. You had to indicate what the formatting was supposed to be if you had any thoughts about that at all, if it was going to be turned into a book or a pamphlet or something else. And so this idea of putting asterisks around words to say, hey, this should be italic, used to be an instruction you were giving to a person who would, typeset it or something like that. Now it's an instruction you're giving to a computer that does that for you. Speaking of your process, so you've been publishing the book, both of the books in progress, which is one of the things that LeanPub sort of facilitates for authors to do. And I was just wondering if you had an approach to that was sort of systemic, or was it occasional? Was it like, I'm going to publish a new chapter every month?
Yeah, so
break your hand.
No, well, I did struggle with it. So last year I really set about doing it. This year I came across a book called The 7-Week Year. I don't know if you know this book, but I would recommend it. So this book tells you that about, in companies you have year targets, and this is why your sales team in Q4 are sitting there going, and they're trying to get good deals in, and they take the whole year and they deliver their targets, but they do it in the Q4. So why not have a 12-week cycle where you have a daily plan and you get things done? And so that's what I've adopted to finish this book. And for the last 12 weeks, I've been in a mode where 2 verbs a day. I know exactly what verbs I have to do. I chuck out a copy in the preview mode. My wife kindly checks the verbs and sort of comes back and goes, what's this nonsense here, Sometimes I ask my teacher as well. She's quite helpful if I'm a bit stuck. But I've been doing that, and so I've been iterating this year, sort of a 10%. I mean, I think I've got a few more verbs. I've been pushing it out. And so probably every 3 months this year, I've done a release. And I think I'll be finished. I think all the verbs will be drafted by next week and will be checked. At that point, I'm going to declare it 90%. And, I might go and get it proofread or do something, or just declare it finished, because I can always come back and do it again.
Yeah, I love hearing those stories. That's so interesting. And I think I saw on social media, LinkedIn or Twitter or something, that you're like hoping to get it done by Christmas or the end of the year or something like that, which is a sort of natural kind of target that a lot of people have for projects like this. It's interesting. A lot of people that we've had people in the past who, with respect to the fact that like LeanPub books can be updated easily anytime. We had one author who just put it at 99%. And intended to leave it there forever, which he thought was a generous thing to do. In his mind, what he was saying to people was, I'm going to keep adding content to this book forever. Buy it now. All the updates you're getting for free. Even me 10 years from now, sort of like fixing a chapter or something like that. And he got somebody, his book has been around for a few years. He got somebody, people started complaining. They're like, when are you going to finally finish this book? I paid for it years ago and you haven't finished it yet. And so he finally decided, okay, fine, I'll just mark it as 100% done and keep updating it, even though it's marked as 100% done. And yeah, just sort of curious the way sort of the messaging sort of can happen around things like that. And just mark, it is your decision as the author to decide when it's finished. But I can say from experience of myself and from watching people, almost nobody can just leave a book, just truly leave it. When they know how easy it is to update them if they're using a platform like ours.
Well, I've got a massive omission from my book. I don't have any verbs of motion.
Oh.
And of course, these are quite difficult in Russian. That it would take at least another chapter to explain them properly. And then you could probably do the 20 of them that there are roughly. Now, so do I come back and do another edition with the verbs of motion? Probably not. It probably warrants its own book, because someone can dip into that separately as a separate subject, or and then they'll learn. The key things from this book is knowing the difference between an imperfective and perfective verb. And if you come away from that book knowing that, then I've succeeded, because I think this is one of the things that's tough.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point about writing books where you're trying to teach people things, is like do I try and teach everything in one book and make the, I mean, if it were on the shelf, this big, does that just turn people away? They're like, oh, I'm not going to learn Russian if Russian means 500-page book that I've got to master. But if it's broken up into chunks, which is a classic way of teaching languages or learning languages and things like that, that can really, really be helpful to people. The last question I always like to ask on the podcast, if the guest is an author on LeanPub, is if there was one magical feature we could build for you, or if there was one thing that always has had you shouting at the computer, "Damn you, LeanPub, why can't you fix this?" that we could fix for you, can you think of anything you would ask us to do?
Yes.
Okay.
I would ask you for, so I think we had the conversation about 2 years ago. I think one of the reasons I'm not on the latest Marcua is the way tables are done. So but all my other stuff on LeanPub will use the latest, but I'm using the fact that a table can be used to format things, much in the same way if you go to Word and you turn off the lines, you can format text. And I think in the later versions, you've got to have a line and a header on a table. Keep me honest here, because if I'm wrong, I can upgrade.
I suspect that features back. So what you want to do is to be able to decide whether or not you want a line under the
Yeah.
title row of the table.
Yeah, so I don't really have a title role, because what I'm doing is I'm using a table to lay out the verb.
Okay.
So that was one of the reasons I didn't upgrade. Now, it could be that you support that. More or less, though, what I would say to people, just if I mean, I found 1 or 2 bugs quite early on, and every time I reported them, people fixed them. Now, obviously, which helps you guys as well, right? Because you don't always see everything. So more or less, the output I get is very good. It renders very well on the e-ink Kindle. It renders very well in Apple Books as well. I've seen a couple of years ago. I saw 1 or 2 little problems on the iPad Kindle, but I think that's the way it renders them. So, yeah, generally, if people have got an issue with it, they should mail hello at, and they will get helped, because I have been.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, thanks very much for saying that. Yeah, so if you email hello@leanpub.com with a description of an issue, if you're an author or a reader, but particularly if you're an author and there's some kind of something you notice that's not being formatted properly. I mean, one of the funny things is, like, it can sound like, "Oh, books, what's so complicated?" And it's incredibly complicated. You've got people making tables with Russian characters in an English language, for example, and then, like, the formatting things can be like, if you've got an idea for, like, how you want your book to look, and it's sort of like a particular project, there can be just in the programming world, we call it a feature that you just need. And at LeanPub, we've tried to we don't always say yes to everything. We can't always do everything right away. But there are some things where it's like, oh, yes, an author will email us and be like, "Hey, there's this problem with this obscure thing." And we're like, "Oh, we can't leave that." And we always we read every email. We put everything in a discussion queue. Doesn't mean we're gonna do it necessarily or do it right away, but we try and do them as quickly as we can because, I mean, that's kind of feedback is great for us, and particularly because, I mean, I think we have a higher proportion as a self-publishing platform. I think we have a higher proportion of blockchain level mathematics PhDs as our authors than maybe other platforms do. And so we get really excellent feedback. And it's one of the reasons that LeanPub is the platform that it is. Well, Chris, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to talk to me and to talk to all of us. The book is Learning Russian Verbs. It's really good. The other book is Learning Russian Handwriting. That's also really good. I recommend them to anyone who's interested in getting started learning Russian.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great to be on. It's a great system. So keep going.
Thanks.